Hey everybody, it's Maureen. For this month's video, I was kind of having a hard time figuring out what I exactly wanted to do this month, and it kind of hit me when I went out. On the weekends, I like to go antiquing, thrift shopping, basically looking at secondhand goods. And when I do that, I sometimes will also go shopping for doll supplies, as there are 5 different antique stores in my local area, mostly owned by the same person, or at least same entity. You may hear a purring in the background. That is Star trying to be helpful. She's also trying to rub against my hand as I hold the camera here. So thank you, Star. You're being helpful. So feline assistance was used during the making of this video. But give me a minute. I'm going to turn around my camera and show you what I found on this week's trip. Okay, so we're back. So this particular doll that you're seeing right here has been at one of the local shops for over a year, maybe 2. And I've been keeping my eye out on her for quite some time because she's a very tall doll in this case, and she's one of the few that I ran into that actually didn't have clothing. And I did a general survey while I was out today after picking her up, just to see, okay, are dolls sold mainly with clothing or not? And what I was finding is if it was Barbie dolls, so we're talking the 11.5-inch size, they tended to be sold without clothing and sometimes in bags where you had more than one Barbie in there for that particular brand. But with porcelain dolls or bisque dolls, like this one, they tended to be sold with their clothing, and a majority of the time, I'd say about 50%. 50% of the time they would have their box, and like the other 50% of the time they didn't have their box. So sometimes they would be without, but normally they would have some sort of tag on them as far as the brand. So if there were someone's doll that ended up, going through an estate, and someone who is a secondhand seller picked it up so they could put it in their shop of things that they sell at like local consignment, for example. Most of the time they either had their box or had some sort of label to denote a value. So this lovely lady I purchased for $18. Now she's 24 inches tall, so for $18, I think I got a pretty good deal, because on average the 12-inch or relatively 12-inch size porcelain dolls were going for like 14. So I'm getting almost twice as much for only a few more bucks if we're going by size versus price alone. But this lovely lady doesn't have any clothing, which means that also if she had come with the dress, she may have been able to sell for a little bit more, because she would have been easier to more than likely have a label of some form or a version that would have showed, oh, okay, she's dressed in Victorian clothing or dressed in Edwardian clothing. Those tend to be the most popular. Like when I'm looking at traditional porcelain dolls, they tend to be in Victorian clothing, so clothing of the 19th century. And it's a 50-50 shot as to whether or not it's a woman dressed as, as a female presenting person, as an adult, or if it's going to be dressed in like a pinafore for a little girl with a little apron and a bonnet and things of this nature. So I always found that really interesting with 19th century dolls. It's kind of like half of them were little girls or babies, and the other half tended to be adult women, more like a fashion doll. So our lady here is definitely meant to be an adult or an older girl, because we actually have high-heeled shoes. And this was actually one of the reasons I wanted to purchase her, is because she already has the shoes. They are painted on. Like, this is part of the porcelain. So there's no losing the shoes on this one. If you were ever used to Barbie fashion dolls, that's the first thing that would always get lost, is the shoes. And it's some of the reason why I like the bisque or porcelain style smaller kits, like what you're seeing in the background here. I like them because the shoes normally are painted on the feet or legs. And that's how it is on pretty much all of my dolls, other than the ones that are cone-bottomed. Like our German doll up there with the orange and black, she has a cone bottom. My Spanish lady down here, she has a cone bottom. So there's no feet there, feet for those particular dolls. But for the ones that do have legs, everybody else happens to have incorporated shoes that actually are, you know, painted on to the appendages, if you want to put it that way. But one of the other topics besides height, whether they're clothed or not, versus value as to what it's being priced as, one of the other things that I wanted to bring up this week is a topic that comes up fairly regularly: creepiness. And I wanted to also bring up an observation. When I've been when I've been shopping for dolls, doll parts, things of this nature, every once in a while, a haunted style doll comes up where they're saying that the doll is haunted, and they try to give details as to who is haunting it and why. Or sometimes the doll itself will have some sort of indication, and I'll put that in quotations, indication that it is haunted, mainly by like blood coming out of the eyes kind of thing, where somebody has aftermarket painted the doll to make it look creepy. Hey, it is editing Maureen here from the future. I wanted to expound upon creepiness just a little bit for you in that case. When you are buying second-hand dolls, I highly recommend that they are coming from somebody who more than likely previously owned them. Any objects you bring into your home, please provide a certain amount of caution. If it doesn't feel right, or other kinds of situations like that, consider your purchase carefully. Just because going over the whole idea of a haunted doll in the previous particular clip, but cultural references like Annabelle and a few other situations have affected people in other ways. So do take that into consideration when you are buying secondhand things. Proceed with caution on any purchases like that, just because nobody wants uninvited guests in their house. Now, in my opinion, I would say the 19th century dolls with their glass eyes are what gives the impression of creepiness. And that's why the other ones that you're seeing in the background here, everybody else has painted eyes. They aren't glass, except for our tall lady right here in the front. Everybody else has painted eyes. So they're not nearly as realistic, which definitely helps calm down the level of creepiness, because the more realistic the doll looks, the more off-putting it is. So I'm gonna zoom in here on our little friend. So now her eyelashes are a little loose, so I am going to have to get in there with some lash glue at some point and just very gently reattach some of them. But like the edges are starting to come up. But the antique shop that I went to, even though it is temperature regulated, it's an old building. So it is going to have an effect over time on some of the items in that building. But I would say those glass eyes there, that's what really kind of makes them a little creepy. She has a slight smile, which isn't bad. Now, there are other kinds of sculpts, I would say, for 19th century dolls. And if you look up Jaimu or reproduction, editing Maureen from the future here again, the terminology I gave was a bit wrong. It's actually jumeau, is a French word for twin. And it is used also with the late 19th, early 20th century French fashion dolls. It's one of the words that they happen to use when you're researching or looking up any of the antique dolls. You'll see that terminology come through. The glass eyes that I had mentioned not only happen in 19th century dolls, it actually goes back to dolls made in the colonial period. That's when wooden dolls were given glass eyes and where we really begin to see the level of creepiness start to come in and more realism. The medieval equivalent to this kind of later realism was Santos dolls that were normally used in churches, sanctuaries, where hyperrealism was very important, and you do see a focus on that, especially in German wood carving of the time, with the hyperrealism in the late medieval period. So we're talking in the 15th century, it really ramps up over in Germany. And that's also where Nuremberg comes into play, where the toy industry really begins to develop. And it was because of the natural proclivity for wood carving in that particular area of Germany, which is in like southern Germany, a little bit below Bavaria. But anyway, I will get back to my future self. Porcelain dolls. The reproduction ones are going to be coming out from the 19th century, mainly by German manufacturers. Or if you look up reproduction French fashion doll, that will also bring up what I like to call creepy dolls. And there is a very interesting old-fashioned look that they happen to have, but yet again, they have glass eyes. And that brings on that level of uncomfortable feeling that you're being watched. So, and I definitely get a little bit of that feeling with this particular lady, but I'm sure once I get her dressed in something a bit more appropriate, she'll maybe feel a little bit better. I hope so. Because to be honest with you, I felt so bad for her. And I'm like, you're the only doll that I've run into that's been sitting around for a couple years now, and you haven't been wearing anything. I just had a lot of empathy for our friend here. So I'm like, I'm going to take you home. I'm going to make you a beautiful dress. And we're going to, figure it out one way or another. I've been trying to debate. She has an amazing neck. I'm very happy with her in that case, because I've been doing a lot of trim and lace and pleating it, making neck ruffs that way. She's a big enough doll that I could probably make a ruff the traditional way with linen instead of trim, and maybe even use a little lace edge depending on how wide I want the ruff to be. I have to figure out the hairstyle first and get that pinned up and out of the way before I tackle clothing and underwear anyway. So I like the curly style. It's very nice. It's just not very practical for what I'm doing. I'm going to have to leave the bangs because at this point there isn't much I can do about them for her. And I'll more than likely be doing some sort of head covering anyway. So I'll figure that out as it goes. I could change the wig. I don't really want to change the wig. I'd rather just use what's already here and not have to spend more money on a human hair wig. This one happens to be synthetic, but I can still figure it out from there. But I'll probably straighten the hair out, braid it up, and then pin it up to prepare it for some sort of head covering. But what I'm going to do before doing anything to the hair or creating any kind of undergarment at this point, because I can, with her being so big, I can really do some amazing things with some detail. We could do some embroidery, excuse me, on the underside, on the like wrist decorations if I really wanted to. It depends if I'm doing ruffs and cuffs. If I'm doing some sort of collar, you know, a neck ruff and wrist cuffs, I don't want to embroider. You do embroidery on the shift and then it get all covered up. So I have to decide what outfit I'm going to be inspired by for her in particular, and probably just follow that, as I've done with my other dolls that are here in my doll library. I pick a piece of art and then I just, you know, make the outfit to match the art. So I am going to show you the rest of the doll library. Yes, there's my feet. So our other Italian dolls, Venetian Italian dolls, there at the bottom. I have a new little friend in there with my Spanish doll on the top. That happens to be a doll from the Living Images by the U.S. Historical Society. That is the Abigail Adams doll. So that's an 18th century one, but it was so pretty I couldn't resist. And it's a very small little one. I wish, like, I'm finding more the more I research, but I wish they had done this level of detail on several of the American 18th century women, like Martha Washington, for example. I think they did do a version of Martha Washington, but it just, her level of, you know, 18th century, it's not a sack back gown, it's a robe a la anglaise. So this is an English gown, not the French variety, but it has the quilted petticoat and it's got the nice little fan. I mean, the detail on that doll is amazing, and they did other ones too for plenty of the fellows. So we have like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, several of the founding fathers, and I'm just like, well, that's all well and great, but I just wish they did a bit more the ladies. Now, they had a separate set from the U.S. Historical Society that was Ladies of America, but they were all half dolls. Hello, it's me again from the future. I realized I was using a little bit of jargon that maybe some folks that are not familiar with dolls may not understand. A half doll happens to be where a porcelain doll is made to about the hips. So you have the head down to the hips, and sometimes they are dressed and sometimes they are not. What more or less happens with those is that some have wigs, other ones don't. Many of them have a carved hairstyle like the other doll kits that I use. A lot of the doll kits that I use are just the head and shoulders, so the bust is what that is called. And then it'll have the hands up to just below the elbow. So you'll have the forearms and the hands on the kits I tend to buy. And they're anywhere from 2 inches to 5 inches in height, as far as like the head and bust situation. And then the arms and hands are relative to scale for the kits that I purchase. Those kits tended to be just the head and hands. You'll see a lot of that used in current situations for angels. And there's not as many of those porcelain doll kits around like there used to be. When I was a little kid, you could go into the dollar store and they were there. I did that like a week or two ago, and the dollar store doesn't seem to sell them. And if you do find them, they tend to be vinyl or plastic now, unfortunately, instead of the nice basic porcelain that one could get. So the 6 dolls that I am creating that I have been talking about, those are made out of those kinds of kits, and they're becoming more difficult to find. But half dolls, getting back to my original interruption of myself, half dolls have been around for a while, and the ones that tended to be undressed normally were made into little pin cushions. You may even hear them referred to as boudoir dolls, where basically it's a little doll that would be made to live on your dresser, and it will hold your hat pins or your dress pins, or maybe you could put a brooch or two, depending how big it is, because the half dolls could be, a couple inches from the hips to the top of the head. They could end up being even taller. Some like 3 or 4 inches tends to be the biggest for those style dolls. So when I'm talking about half dolls in the prior and later clips, I'm basically saying that when that series was created, the dolls were mainly dressed from the waist up, and they created a skirt of some form. So there wasn't the level of sewing detail and trim like what was done on the larger 11-inch size dolls that the same historical society created. And I will get back to my future self. And they had, like, Pocahontas, for example. They had her formal Elizabethan portrait. Like, I think, like, the top half of the doll was more the top half of the outfit, and then the bottom half was the fabric. I think they could have done it in a different way, or had done something like this, where they did an 11-inch size with all the detail. It just appears to me, when I look at the other edition that they did with Ladies of America, doing it as a half doll just seemed, I don't know, like a shortcut. And I think if you want to say half-assed, I'm going to say half-assed, because that's what it feels like anyway. So, and there's the other bit of my doll library. I have a couple of the Pleasant Company Dolls of the World in with, I have the French one with my French doll, and I have the English one with my English doll, so they're hanging out in there too. So, if I find any other, like, small 11-inch or less size dolls that I would like to put in with my Italian friend, if I can find an Italian variety, that would be kind of nice. Not necessary, but, everybody needs a friend, I guess. And there's all sorts of wonderful friends here on this channel. So, like, for me, I guess you could say the main way that I find the doll kits that I purchase is either locally, I can locally source them through the 5 different antique/thrift shops, secondhand stores that are around in my local area, and also shop online. But I do have to be careful. Like, online, your shipping costs can be astronomical, so I try to keep that in mind when I'm shopping for dolls for my own collection, or any online shopping in general. I really try to, you know, take advantage of free shipping if I can, or find a way of negotiating it. It's worth it. Got to save some money here and there. But if you have any suggestions for a name for my very long-legged lady right here, I would be happy to have those in the comments. And I will be talking to you in my next month's video. And if you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing. I upload once monthly, as I had mentioned. And we have crafty shenanigans going on here on this channel. And I will talk to you guys in my next video. Take care. Bye-bye.